Hello and welcome to Data Driven. In this episode, Frank and Andy reflect on the year that 2022. It was quite the year for all of us here at Data Driven Media, both personally and professionally. I mean, yours truly finally has a visual appearance, so there's that. Now here are Frank and Andy.
All right, so that uppity little techno mix song is the little new pre-roll that we done. I might change it up a bit because I've been playing around with some new graphics and stuff like that, and as well as some really cool stuff that I've been doing with ChatGPT, which it's funny because I'm gonna pull up some graphics. Is that what the year started with? So it's been a wild year, right? So like for both of us, both professionally and personally, like in good ways and in bad ways, like it's been kind of like a thing. But I am most proud of how we both have kind of handled the changes and kind of rolled with the punches. And it's for us, for me anyway, like, and I know you do this too, is that I celebrate New Year's on November 1st, and this year I have a wall calendar, and I've actually had the entire year marked out. And according to this, I might need to get my glasses, but it's like 306 days until November 1st. Just saying.
That sounds right.
Um, but so it's been an interesting year, and I think that for me, I'm just fascinated with how far creative AI has gotten. When I say creative AI, what I'm referring to is I'm looking for old examples. I can't seem to find any on this computer. When I say creative AI, I mean stuff like this. Here we go. And I'm not sharing my screen. I just realized that. This is what happens. You go on a cruise and kind of your brain cells. But it was awesome. The cruise was nice. A little bit of seasickness in the family, which kind of ruined it. But for the most part, it was all of our first cruise, and it was fascinating because you stay in one place, but it's like being in a hotel that moves. And
right.
It was we left from Baltimore and ultimately made it to the Bahamas. So
nice.
The first day we stopped in Charleston, and then the second day was Cape Canaveral, Florida. So it went from being like really cold to warm to nice and warm. And then we went to the Bahamas. It was super nice. And we ended up getting to Freeport, and there's like a whole touristy trap thing there, and like getting a cab to like anything near, or you had to pay for the cruise line to do the excursion, which are very expensive. So we just walked to like the nearest beach, and it was an interesting walk. I may write it. I took a lot of pictures because it was just a very surreal kind of experience. And I got bit by fire ants.
What?
Got bit by fire ants.
You did not tell me that.
No, I forgot to tell you. And I'd never been bit by fire ants, so I didn't know what to expect. Like first, I thought I stepped on a rock, and then I'm like, oh, I must have stepped on a lot of rocks.
Oh no, Frank.
And
no.
so I ended up like my foot started blowing up, and I'm like freaking out. So we head back to the boat, and I'm like looking on my phone, like which was nice because T-Mobile, you don't get internet. Well, I'll find out when the bill comes, but according to what T-Mobile text messaged me, I'm not going to get an extra bill for that, even though technically it is another country. So we'll see what happens.
Right.
So then I'm like, oh my God. So I kind of took a shower right away, like rinsed it off. And then I was Googling on the phone, and I saw like if you put vinegar on it. So I ran to like the upstairs restaurant, poured like a cup full of vinegar, and then put it on there. And then the burning and the itching stopped right away.
Oh, that's good.
Like, it was just amazing. I was just like, because when you get bit by something new, like, you don't know, like, do I have an allergy to it? We'll find out. But at first, like, the way it was, like, blowing up, I'm like, oh, my God.
That's crazy. So one of our LinkedIn users said, Happy New Year, guys. I can't see who it is. I was actually showing off my rooster hair.
Your rooster hair.
It's what happens when you don't take a shower, and I'm kind of slumming it today.
I even shaved
Haven't
for
taken a
this.
shower yet. I haven't shaved either, but I was over there looking to see who it was. So it's just saying LinkedIn loser, not loser.
Oh God.
LinkedIn user. That was a bad, horrible faux pas. Apologies, but Happy New Year to you two, whoever you
I have
are.
a couple theories. It happens to one of three people. It's going to happen to Saduki,
Mm-hmm.
Nanos, or Rupesh. That tends to be who that messes up.
And none of them are losers.
No, they're awesome people. Like,
They're awesome.
they're
All
all
of them are awesome. Yes.
One of them is the next Steve Jobs, and he always gets embarrassed when I mention that. But yeah, so we're also going to record this and put this on the podcast too, because the podcast production schedule has been since reinvent. So kind of like and this isn't complaining, right? I mean, it's been all things aside, this has been an epic year, right? Like it didn't start off great, you know, because last Christmas I gave you my heart. No, sorry, couldn't let that go. So last Christmas, I have 5 dogs, right? I had 5 dogs last year too. And Christmas Day, like Christmas Eve, no, it was Christmas Day. I come downstairs, and because one of the dogs was kind of like 15 and he was always a bit punchy with other male dogs. And we have one other male dog, who is the dingo that we refer to from now and then. And I come downstairs and there's like blood everywhere.
Oh, Frank.
And I'm like, holy crap. And I'm like, oh my God. And he basically cut his paw and had blood everywhere. So we took him to like the emergency vet, and he was really lethargic, this guy. And like, they were like, yeah, you got to put him down.
Yeah.
And we're like, that sucks on Christmas Day. I mean, my grandmother died on Christmas Day. So like, it's weird how it kind of makes it bittersweet. I should probably go to therapy for that, but so anyway, so we ended up like, well, you know what? If we got to put him down, let's do the bucket list. Let's go get him rotisserie chicken. We'll take him to when he used to go to dog parks, like his favorite dog park, and we kind of like did this whole like bucket list for Tanner type thing, and he bounced back. Like it was like a Christmas miracle. Like he bounced back, and like you know, he actually ended up dying in March. He actually lived till March, which was kind of again a bittersweet thing, you know, like and then but like out of the blue, our Weimaraner had a seizure in January, and she died. Right, so that was kind of like the start of the year, and then the other dog died like a little bit later. And then I ended up changing jobs kind of in the middle of all this too, which was kind of interesting. Which was a good move. Like, you know, I love Red Hat. Red Hat has been very interesting. And you know, over the past since 2021, I've changed jobs a couple of times, which was for the opportunity, but changing jobs still has a certain amount of, you know, quantitative stress. I don't know, but there's a certain amount of like pressure and stress that comes with that. And you know, it wears on you. Like, I don't know how to explain it, but it was just kind of like, but I think I made the right decision, and that's been kind of validated because as we kind of, you know, visit people for the holidays and stuff like that, I've met people, acquaintances and stuff like that, some of which may be watching on LinkedIn, who are just unhappy on their jobs. Right. And like, I get it. Like I get the need for homeostasis. I understand that. But if you're in a bad situation, the bad situation is not going to change.
Probably
on its own. Probably not. Right. I mean, it might, but I mean, but if you kind of play the dice on it, like the odds of it changing spontaneously on its own are not in your favor.
Right.
So, you know, I would encourage anyone who's thinking about that to really think it through. And you know, figure out the cost of the misery that you stay in, because anything I've learned this year is that it's not that time is money. Time is more important than money, because you can always make money back. You can't ever get time back. Like this moment, today, like, you know, we were going to stream yesterday, right? Like, so but I took the kids to Sky Zone, and I was like, I'm never going to get this time back with him, because the older one's already a teenager and he's already kind of like off doing his own thing half the time. But I had their attention, and I was like, you know what, screw it. 24 hours isn't going to kill anyone. So I would encourage folks to think about that. The cost of the misery and your time is worth something. I do need a haircut, by the way. For those listening, for those listening and on the podcast, as opposed to watching us, you are spared our awful hair.
Yes, we have bad hair day, both of us.
So then I went on my first business trip for Red Hat, which I think was my first business trip in since the plague started. So I actually flew. I went to New York for like a day in March.
Right.
And that's when I found out my uncle died. And he had died like a month before. And for reasons that are outside the scope of this podcast, like we kind of lost touch. So it's been like, so in the last, so my mom died last Thanksgiving. My uncle died sometime in January, and I lost 2 dogs. Right. So that was kind of like the start of the year. But I did have a new job, and I was really excited about the opportunity. And, I just kind of marched on, and then the crazy thing is, right. So if you look at like all the things, like the top stressors in your life, right. Some of them are, having a new kid, or, death in the family, or, or changing jobs.
Only thing, well, that wasn't all.
That wasn't all, because, anything worth doing is worth overdoing. And if you saw the pictures of my Christmas decorations for this house, which is the other thing I did this year, was I actually bought my first house. Because our old house was owned by my wife, actually. And that has to do with the fact that after 9/11, my credit was destroyed, like basically, because I could, the job market was just awful. And it took me, didn't buy my first house till I was in my 40s. So,
Right.
But you know what? The awesome thing about this house, and I don't think I've shared this, at least publicly, right? Like, so I grew up in a 4-story walk-up, in a very blue-collar, lower income place, and now this house is a 4-story. We don't have an elevator in the house, so it's a 4-story walk-up. And I did the measurement, and the block I grew up on, I have a plot of land that is slightly bigger than that.
My goodness.
We're talking about 3.7 acres versus 3.99 acres, right? Like that's kind of like the difference, because the county thinks the plot size is one thing, and then the real estate listing said something else, and then there was another third data point. So we're somewhere between 3.92 and 3.99999. So, but the county, they're the one that determines the taxes, so their number is what actually counts.
Gotcha. So you're living in a house right now on a plot of land that is larger than the block I grew up on.
And the building is about the same size. And like for me, and here it gets better, Andy. It gets better. But wait, there's more. I'm channeling my inner Billy Mays. But wait, there's more. The house was built in 2002.
Okay.
Which at that point in my life in 2002, my life was an epic. I don't want to say it, but it was a certain type of show, and it was a sugar honey iced tea show, right? My life was in utter shambles. Like after 9/11, I lost my job. The girlfriend left me, and it was just awful. Like it was like a country music song, except the dog didn't die. Like it was like that. And and I didn't have a pickup truck. But other than that, but I mean, it was, but so like for me, like waking up in this house is a little reminder of stay in the fight, right? Like,
yes,
and keep pushing, right? And it was, and I'm glad we bought the house before the interest rates went crazy. So there's that.
And it was, there's a long story that you probably don't want to go into, but there were a lot of, let's just call them coincidences. That happened back to back. You bought that house faster than I've ever heard of anyone buying a house. You found it technically before it reached the market.
Right. On St. Patrick's Day.
It was. Yeah. And that's just a couple of the things. There's way more. There's way more but it was
one of those things where I look back on it, and even when it was happening, I was like, I could picture, and you and I both are people of faith, and for those that aren't, good on you, live your life, whatever. But it was almost like sometimes I get so dense that the God was like doing the hello McFly, this. Like there was just so many things that kind of came together to make this happen that I'm convinced that it was divine intervention. But I also know there's the statistician, data scientist in me is that, well, theoretically, coincidences can happen. But it is.
We're both engineers. We don't believe
we're both engineers. That's right.
That's right.
But so it was interesting because the house is really cool. The next level of stress was selling the old one in the midst of kind of, I wouldn't say a real estate crash because that hasn't happened yet here, but definitely a cooling market. And the first real estate agent we had was I never thought floating two mortgages is a stress that I don't recommend on anyone, honestly. In the midst of moving, the first time I've ever moved with kids, right? So there was that whole emotional thing, like, oh, the kids were born in this house,
Sure. And then school systems for them changing.
School systems for them changing.
Just a whole slew.
Which honestly was the major driver for that. I mean, like, again, that's a bit of a sidetrack, but like the way that the old school system handled the pandemic did not fill me with confidence, put it that way. And they ended up firing the school superintendent.
Oh, wow.
And pursue other interests.
Sure.
And then the temporary one became the permanent one. And she seemed legit, but what she said didn't line up with her actions. And I'm like, I know how this is going to play out. And I don't want any part of it. So,
and you were right next to a county where that sort of shenanigans weren't happening.
Well, technically it's like 2 or 3 counties away, but So,
okay, I didn't realize. I thought it was closer.
It's weird because there's a point in Maryland. The shape of Maryland to begin with is very weird, and if you read there's a really good book, How the States Got Their Shapes.
Oh, interesting.
And
okay,
I think it's good for Americans to read, but I think it's also fascinating for Europeans or not, anyone outside of North America to kind of understand, like, this is a weird setup. Like, it is a weird setup, right? You have, tiny states in the east and then big square states in the west, and then kind of like that. It explains it, but Maryland basically is kind of like has lost every single territorial dispute in court.
Oh, no.
Like in its lifetime. So there was actually, and it's interesting because some of the border disputes are still ongoing, believe it or not, in the U.S.
I did not know that.
Like the most famous one I remember is that when I was again, I grew up in New York, right? So one of the famous ones was there was an argument over who owned Ellis Island.
So I was going to say, I've heard arguments regarding islands off the East Coast. There's some of those still ongoing.
So, and all of this was driven by, it was really driven by sales tax revenue, right? Because when they refurbished Ellis Island, turned it into a museum, New Jersey's looking at it, and the way the islands are set up, it's like literally 50 feet from the shore, from the New Jersey City shore, like the Jersey side.
Yeah.
And you're like, and Jersey was like, wow, a lot of tourists are going there, getting a lot of money on that. And it turns out it's fascinating. They get into this in the book because I kind of knew part of the details, right? Because there was also arguments about Statue of Liberty and things like that. So the way that the original charter was set up was that New Jersey, the borderline of the state is there's the halfway point between the Hudson River. Now, there's other borders in New Jersey, but the border I care about because I grew up next to it is the side that faces New York City and is the halfway point of the river. Which is interesting.
Isn't Ellis Island inside of that?
It is the inside. So I was always kind of like, how'd that happen, right?
Yeah.
But it turns out the original charter was any island in that body of water belongs to New York.
So you've got an asterisk. We got an asterisk. Middle of the.
Here's the line, but if it's an island, it belongs to New York. Right. And that had to do realistically with the political pull that the Duke of York had over the Duke of Jersey. That's probably what it was.
And I've got you. That I don't accept that. I don't think politics influences things like that, Frank.
Dude, we're not even done with that. Like it's just interesting. So you look at all this political turmoil you're seeing now, and this is new. It's like it's not really that new. We just had like 30, 40 years of quiet.
Okay.
But one of the interesting things is Maryland. So at one point, now remember, this goes back to the when the king determined, the English king basically said, "Oh, Andy, you've been a good subject. We'll give you some land." And you'd be like, well, Can I get some land here in the UK? Nah, you're not that good of a friend. Why don't you just take like, I don't know, 1 million hectares or 1 million acres in the New World? And you'd be like, well, thanks.
Right.
And so long story short, cartography wasn't of the New World, hadn't been really settled yet. And there were no satellite imagery. So it turns out that both the Pennsylvania is easy to remember who got that, right? The Penn family, right? Lord Baltimore and another family, Crofton, I forget. But anyway, they got Maryland, but they were both promised the same land.
Oh,
to the point where somebody with the Maryland charter could say Philadelphia belongs to us.
My goodness.
And somebody with the Pennsylvania charter could be like, no, it belongs to us, and actually Baltimore too.
Goodness.
Right. So it was this really kind of contentious thing, and that is what started the Mason-Dixon line. So they were two cartographers. Mason-Dixon line has nothing to do with the borderline between North and South, although it became that later. Yeah. This was in the 1700s because it was settling a dispute, because no one wanted to go and tell the king you're a freaking idiot, or you hired doofus. It was basically like that, right? Like, it's not like today where they're basically the British royal families really doesn't have the political pull that they used to 300-400 years ago. And I know we have a lot of listeners in UK, so sorry if you found that offensive. But basically,
the king had made an error. And
the king had made an error, but no one wanted to tell him that he made an error.
And see, I see the other side of this as well, because you and I talk about occasionally you going Jersey on something. And so obviously that trait hadn't also developed yet.
That had not developed.
Because someone from, I'll just say this, not someone, I'll say you. When you go Jersey on somebody, you will go tell a king or anybody that they're being an idiot.
Yeah.
Yes.
I might even use more colorful language that would jeopardize our iTunes rating. So ultimately what it was is that the Penn family and whoever was, there were really two founding families in Maryland.
Right.
One of them was the Lord Baltimore's family, and I forget what their last name was. It was like Cross. Someone's going to correct me, but it's been a while since I've read the book. Anyway, they basically said to each other, look, if we go to the king, look, we could duke it out, right? And the king's going to put the smack down on both of us. Right. Or we go to the king, we say, dude, you messed up. Right.
Right.
Or we just say, pick a line. You get Philly, we get Baltimore. We walk away. No harm, no foul. And that's how the funding of the Mason-Dixon line came. It was one guy named Mason, one guy named Dixon, that they kind of drew the straight line that is the northern border of Maryland.
Okay.
So, and then there was also another dispute between Virginia and Maryland, because the charter said, hey, Maryland gets the whatever's north of the headwaters of the Potomac. Right. But what they didn't know was, hey, somewhere, I think around Front Royal, it goes in two different directions. The headwaters of the Potomac, right? So, and Virginia's like, well, we want more land, right? Because land is money. Land is traditionally has meant money, and then that meant power. Sure. So you want more. Reminds me of that quote from The Matrix, from the Oracle. Like, same thing every man with money and power wants: more money and power. So they basically, Maryland is like, no. They meant the southern headwater of the branch.
Sure.
And then Virginia's like, no. So Virginia won.
Gotcha.
And then apparently as recently as like the 60s or the 70s, the Delaware's charter gets really weird, right? That's why there's a circle as part of it, and there's a line. But it turns out that the Earth is a sphere, turns out. And the way the charter was kind of determined, that there was this wedge that if you base it on the original kind of laws, it could be Maryland. You could read the map one of three ways. Maryland gets it, Pennsylvania gets it, or Delaware gets it. And I think ultimately there was a court case, and Maryland was like, every fight we've lost, so we're out of this. So it basically became between Pennsylvania and Delaware. I think Delaware ended up winning.
Okay.
But there's a fascinating whole rabbit trail you can go on called the wedge, and it was basically this wedge shape, and we're only talking like 2-3 square miles, right? So
my goodness,
it wasn't like, but so it's fascinating, kind of like how that works out, and I've always,
the states got their shape,
and the states got their shapes. I don't know if it's an audiobook. Okay. But it was definitely,
I don't think that would work as well. You need the visuals.
Like, and there's this whole thing, like there's this whole preamble, like to the thing. It's like you want to read this part because you're going to be reflected back to this, right? Because it all kind of like the border of Virginia, North Carolina is on 39th parallel, whatever that is.
Yeah, that's straight.
That's straight, and there's a whole reason why that's straight, and you'll see that kind of come back in the future and things like that. But again, we've gone way down this rabbit hole.
But that's okay, because one of the things I'll just throw in and say, one of the things that changed for me this year is I've always been kind of an amateur history weenie, and I started reading more historical stuff. I've and you know me, Frank, I have something like 6 to 12 books going at any given time, and I'll heat up on one and then put it aside and go do something else. I did a lot of history reading. I did. I'm in the middle of one on Patrick Henry.
Oh, interesting.
And what was fascinating about
talk about someone who would give the king a what for?
Well, for reals. Right. And it was interesting because I remember way back. Now let's see. How long ago would that have been? It'd probably been about 50 years ago. I was in the 4th grade, and I remember my teacher teaching us Virginia history in the 4th grade back in 50 years ago, 72, I guess. And she said the oddest thing, and my memory latches onto a few odd things that happen, especially things that are kind of, and every decade or so I thought about this. What she said was, Patrick Henry, of course, gave the "Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death" speech, which is credited largely with influencing and kind of being the thing that pushed us over the edge towards revolution. The quirk was when the Constitution was being circulated and kind of floated around, the idea of it, Patrick Henry spoke against it. And I was always kind of, like I said, the little brain every decade or so would kind of float up to the top. And I don't know everything about why he was against it, but I was kind of focused on that. I wanted to know more about him, more about why he opposed that. And I've learned enough to know, this is a crazy thought, that his concern, one of his concerns, probably his chief concern, was that the federal government would achieve more power and the states would lose power. I know, crazy, right? Never happened. But it's an interesting balance. And
I see we have a question.
So I see Kevin has a question. Any digital health insights for CES 2023? I'm going to jump in because I know Frank's got more thoughts on this, but I'm just going to say I would say you're probably going to see more AI.
That's like, it's a day ending in Y. I know when you're listening to this, it's a day ending in Y. But I mean, I think one of the things, and before we got sidetracked into kind of me like flexing on a new house, like flexing, that's me flexing. flexing on a new house is, you know, it was it was meant to be an inspirational message, and somehow we talked about Maryland.
Yes.
I think we got into it because we were talking about this. If the shape of the state of Maryland is weird, the shape of the counties is even a little weirder.
Right.
So we're even though we're 45 minutes away, we're 2 or 3, maybe 4 counties away, depending on how you drive up. So on the drive back to the old house, I would pass through Howard County, Frederick County, and then Montgomery County, and then we're in Carroll. So like it, and I think if there's another way, I can probably add another one in too. Cool. But that's how we ended up there. So sorry about that. So I would say, I think the interesting thing here is, you know, digital health insights. I think, and we'll talk about this, maybe even do a live demo, Andy, of ChatGPT or some variant of it is going to, I think, play a bigger role in healthcare, right? So part of this is ChatGPT. I know that they're keeping a tight wrap on it in terms of, you know, are they allowing an API access to it and things like that. But how good that technology is alarmingly good. Like, I mean, it came out while I was at reInvent, and while I was at reInvent, I was still working on the slides, still working on presentations, still working on demos. So I was very heads down. And plus, when you're in Vegas, it's very hard to pay attention to the outside world because it's Vegas.
You're in Vegas.
And like, so I kept seeing, like, you know, wow, you got to check out ChatGPT. So I'm like, whatever. And then I finally get stuck at the airport for a few hours, and I'm like, I start digging into it, and I'm like, this is really good. This is like unbelievably good, like surreally good. And there was another product that was out there. It was I think it was based on GPT-3, all these stupid names. And it was called talktotransformer.com. And it was basically, you would ask it questions or you would prompt it and it would produce some kind of output. And it wasn't always great, but it was uncanny. It was uncanny in how good it was.
Right.
But this ChatGPT has 10x that, like, to the point of ridiculousness. And we'll talk about it. So I would say, any digital health insights is that I would say that some kind of NLP is going to play a role in it, right? I don't know what that's going to be, but I think obviously AI is going to be part of this. I also think that you're probably going to see the first inklings of kind of ethics in AI in health tech kind of come up in a big way. Because I think that if you look at the controversy around kind of what GPT does, and GPT-3 it's not deep fakes, it's not producing images, it's just producing text, right? Which on one, you know, speaking of Patrick Henry, right? It's a good segue, right? Like, you know, back in the day when he said, give me liberty or give me death, right? There was no CNN, there was no Twitter, there was no live feeds, right? Somebody wrote that down and spread that around, right?
Yeah.
Words, as the pen is mightier than the sword, right? That is an old thing. That is not, you know, that's an I forget who originally coined that. It might have been Shakespeare, but goes back that far. Which is to say that I think what has alarmed people more than deepfakes, more than anything else, is how good this can do and what this can do, to the point where you actually have the people who are controlling ChatGPT putting guardrails around what it says, the most obvious being fossil fuels. Right now, you could make the argument for or against fossil fuels, but I don't think we have the alternatives quite ready. But, you know, again, that's a debate for another day. The big problem isn't so much, and I've played with solar panels. I have a solar panel set up for kind of a small scale one. The number one problem is energy storage, right?
Right.
And it's just, you know, the fact of the matter is, no matter what happens, the Earth will spin, and for anywhere between 8 to 12 hours a day, depending on where you are, could go completely the other way, right? 23 and 1 or whatever. The sun is not shining, right? There's a planet in the way, right? And you have to, the challenge of solar is you have to overproduce during the sunlight hours and then store that energy somewhere until the sun rises again. And that, oddly enough, is a problem that we're having a lot of trouble solving, to the point where there's actually huge public works projects And I see we kind of deviated again. There's huge public works projects, I think in Tennessee. It's an energy storage mechanism, and it's basically a lake. So what they'll do, and there's variations on this. There's a YouTuber that does the whole thing where he built it himself on his roof, and he talks about it. And like basically what it'll do is it will during the sunlight hours, a solar powered pump, say that 10 times fast, will fill up a reservoir somewhere high up, and then at night it's like a dam. So they'll do that. They'll let it down, and that so far, once you get to a certain scale, is the most cost effective way of energy storage today.
Right.
And one of the problems with fossil fuels, and no one says this, unfortunately, right, is the reason why we're kind of stuck on them for the for a foreseeable time. Hey, it's Rupesh.
Hey, Rupesh.
Is how effective they are at energy density. The energy density is just unreal. And so this guy goes through this whole thing where he builds this like 50-gallon drum, puts it on top of his house, like a 3-4 story building, had to like do all this extra engineering to support all that water. Right. And at the end of it, when he ran the numbers, he's like, because it was kind of like one of the things was like, well, why doesn't everybody have this? Here's why. It basically was the equivalent of energy storage of a AA battery.
Yeah.
So that's the problem. If we solve the energy storage problem, that will open up a lot of doors. So I think the big barrier is that. But then again, like whether or not it's a good idea to censor that type of discussion is another debate. But the fact that it can be done does alarms me in terms of, well, who's pulling the strings? Because, you could say whenever somebody writes something, there's always some kind of bias in it, right? Like, so AI is doing that. I think one of the big problems is that we trust AI a little too much, right? Well, you and I are old enough to remember when adults around us would say, well, the computer can't be wrong, right? I don't know if you remember hearing that as a kid.
I did.
Well, the computer said this. You don't hear that as much anymore, right? But there still is this implicit trust of a computer would do it, or if it had to.
Well, and kind of jumping back to Kevin's question. That's okay. He was talking about image analysis, and and I think that's a spot where AI can, or
absolutely,
any kind of machine learning can help us a great deal. I have friends who have experienced that, and where a human made a mistake. It was an honest mistake, but still a mistake, and it was incredibly dangerous in this particular instance. So, if we, as we train machines to do a better job at image analysis, I think, Kevin, you're spot on. I expect two things to come out of that: some bifurcation, and hopefully there'll be science applied in this crazy old idea of the scientific method, and not the political term that we now use when we say science.
It's not just political. There's also money, right?
That's true. Okay, political, financial stuff, and I'm not against people making money, and I'm not against people using politics for good, but I guess the stories we hear about are not of those two outcomes. But I think there's stuff there. And you and I, Frank, got into a conversation about this, and we actually did a test. I won't go in and share the the results of the test because I don't think it was a good test. But I was playing with ChatGPT and I asked it a question. I said, "Tell me how to do this thing," and it's a thing I know how to do. And my first response was very much that mindset: the computer can't be wrong. Because I read it, and my first response was, I haven't heard of doing it that way. And so I didn't even know. So my first thought was, it knows something that I don't.
Which is a possibility. There is a possibility.
It is a possibility. And, but, and then the more I kind of worked through the answer and looked at the disclaimer on ChatGPT, it really doesn't do anything after 2021.
Right.
And what it said was inaccurate today. Let me just throw that out there. And the other thing that was interesting about it is I don't think it understood the question I asked. And
which is totally reasonable to assume too.
That could be me. Right. And when I thought, that's what I landed on. I didn't ask the question well enough. Right. And I could have, what's nice about Chat GPT is the context. It carries the context through the session.
Which is a non-trivial problem, by the way.
Very much so. So that's part of the creative part of it. Right. So there's that. And so Kevin, I'll just tell you, I'll skip to the end and then let Frank jump in on this, because Frank made a very astute observation about this. This was a conversation we had in the past week, and his astute observation was using AI like ChatGPT to augment human abilities. So this is where you're kind of drawing the line between new automation and, and common sense or human ability and all of that. It's a thing that that a few geeks that I know have written about in reference to the Mechanical Turk. And what we see is the line on the Mechanical Turk just keeps improving, but it doesn't do so exponentially, and it doesn't always get it right.
Yeah, I think it's I think one of the problems is that there's a class of folks that were very smug, and I would count myself, if not the core of the community, at the periphery of that community, right? Is the idea that AI can't replace, AI is going to replace the low skill jobs first, right? And you see that, right? Like, when I was flying through back from Vegas, and I'm out of focus. So if you're listening, maybe that is the premier experience. I don't know. There was a, in Vegas somewhere, there was a bar where they had a robotic bartender, right? And then in SFO, there was a robotic barista, right? Like, so that does fit into the traditional model of, that type of work will be replaced first. But I think what ChatGPT has done, as well as kind of the DALL-E stuff, which image creation, has, I think, sent shockwaves through the creative community, right? Writers, artists, and things like that, who just assumed that would be the last thing that AI would be able to do, right? Because we think that creativity is a sole bastion, or is the sole domain of humans.
Which is, I'll interject here, which is interesting because for years they've had algorithms doing what appeared to be creative work.
Right. But you would never see, say, a creative work being done and winning an award. Like, I think it was at the Iowa State Fair. Was it some state fair somewhere? Somebody submitted an artwork that was done by DALL-E, and like everybody just like lost their minds, right? Like, they flipped that out, and I'm not sure like what. So it's funny because like about a year ago there was this notion of, hey, we're on the verge of an AI winter. The innovations have slowed down, and I said that I was like, well, quantum computing might save us, right? But here we go. Like, so this is something that I stumbled across, and I see we have questions. Let's see. So that actually is a good question, because I was wondering about it. So the question that Kevin had was, when will 2022 material be added to GPT-3? So I think this is going to be an ongoing improvement. Now, so when you train a transformer, one of the advantages of transformers is you don't have to start from scratch. So what there's probably going to be is that periodically, you'll have to train it on new material, right? So it works more like a transfer learning network than kind of like a traditional kind of, you're not starting from zero. So I don't know when that'll be. I think that it's probably happening now, to be honest. They're just not telling us. And I think they're trying to figure out, how often do you update it? How often, and how much compute resources does that cost? That would be my guess, is what they're working on now, because a lot of data engineering goes into this when they create this. So this was probably not my best example, but this here is a VQ GAN, and this was kind of like the artwork I was playing with about a year ago, earlier into the year. And you'll see it's good and stuff like that, but there's a certain amount of coherence that it doesn't have.
And this is DALL-E, right, Frank?
This is not DALL-E. This is VQ GAN.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
So then DALL-E comes around, and take a look at the improvement in terms of what I call coherence. I can't think of a better name for it. But look how coherent that is, right? Where is this? Is it going to switch the, like, that looks like real. If I put kind of, I said monkey in a spacesuit before, it would have had like monkeys in space and suits and stuff. Like, I just don't think that the coherence on this is so much better now. Right?
Right.
There's a certain amount of, again, coherence is the word I'm using. The robot in stained glass was the theme for this one. I mean, look how much advances there's been in this technology. Unreal.
Yeah.
So the short of it is that the amount of innovation in this space in such a short period of time.
Yes. We're definitely not in a winter. Or if we were, we're now in a spring.
We're definitely in a heat wave. I think we're in a heat wave.
And Kevin, your point, explainable AI with end user input is making progress. And I think that was what Frank and I were sharing when we were chatting a couple of 3 days ago, is that there's definitely still a need for human input, but the advances being made in the topics seems to be accelerating the ability of humans to, at least provide a solution or offer a path forward. And if we can do that, acceleration, especially in things like you mentioned earlier about medical stuff, digital health, anytime we can do acceleration in digital health, that's a win. It gives us earlier detection. We're talking about biological, processes, especially the negative biological processes. So the earlier we catch something like that, the better. And personally, I'm not speaking for anybody else, mind you, but personally, I'm willing to tolerate a couple of false positives in order to get false negatives. No, well, I'd rather get
false positives. Yeah.
Yeah. I want the, I'd rather it be wrong about bad news, and I'm willing to tolerate that in order to get it to be right earlier about bad news. That makes sense.
Exactly. But I mean, this is the point. You want the human in the loop. And that's something that
absolutely
we can't get away from. We shouldn't get away from, right? Like, and I think,
well, if we do, we're on track for Skynet, and that
if we're
plot,
lucky.
Yeah, that plot was was a really good guess at how AI would evolve, and even now, when you take the human out of the loop, you're asking for trouble.
Right. Well, I also think that there's definitely like this the augmentation of human ability, right? So like if we look at let me see if I could share my screen again. Right. So this was kind of like, if you've seen my YouTube videos or you see my LinkedIn feed, I have a thing where I'll ask it a question, explain how to get started in AWS SageMaker, right? And I put that to a couple of other AI tools, and it came up with a complete script. So this is an example, right? I said, write a YouTube script reviewing the past year, which I bought a new house, moved, struggled to sell the old house. My uncle died, 2 dogs died, got a new Weimaraner puppy, fostered a homeless dog, changed jobs, and spoke at reInvent. And look, I mean, it came up with a pretty solid thing.
Yeah.
And it even does language translation. I even asked it, like, how would you say in Arabic quantum computer? And I was just curious, like, what would that look like?
Yeah.
And it even does this, right? So like there's a whole thing here that, like, just, I think that, I mean, if I got writer's block,
yeah,
I could just be like, So here's an example, right? So I was writing something, and I had this grand plan of while I was on the cruise, I was going to do kind of the, while I'm at sea in the tropics or whatever, the Hemingway thing. I would write and like whatever. Didn't happen, by the way. But I kind of was like, I was trying to explain the plot of a movie, and it was the 36 Chambers of Shaolin in a way that would make sense and coherent and be concise, which is, I've watched the movie like 100 times. Like there's things I'll just say that I just take for granted. I asked ChatGPT to explain the plot, and in like 4 paragraphs, it did a better job than me. Right now, I copied that text and I modified it, but I was really struggling with that, and that broke through the thing. So I think that augmenting that. Now, what's interesting, I'll get back to what Kevin asked, is a friend of ours was recently hospitalized with cellulitis. So just for curiosity, I typed in, what is cellulitis? And it gave the whole thing. And and then I said, what causes it?
Yeah.
And it gave me a whole list of things that cause it. Now, if I were to, I would imagine at some point medical things will be gated off, right? Because it's probably what Kevin's saying, the FDA, right? I would be if I were a lawyer, I would be very cautious about what I say about what is a certain disease. And I would imagine if I asked it, do I have this, it would potentially give me an answer of, I can't answer that, right? Because if you ask Alexa, like a health related question, she will be like,
Thank goodness WebMD is around.
But I mean, I think it's interesting. Like, how will regulations come to this? Because that's inevitable, right? Like, you think of the Thanos thing. I am inevitable. Like regulations is kind of like that. But I mean, that's the thing. So I wonder. I wonder. He mentioned digital health insights for CES. I would say what you're probably going to see is some kind of, and we've had this, right? The You Only Virtual guy, like I think you're going to see kind of like a pocket therapist. That's an app, right? That will be available 24/7, and then maybe when an actual human can look at it, maybe they'll sign you. We'll say, a therapist, Tom or Susie or whatever, and then like you could talk to a virtual Tom or Susie anytime, day or night.
That's an interesting thought, because some of the early articles I saw when ChatGPT first started getting publicity, I want to say it was like November, maybe October.
Yeah, that's
when I first started seeing it. Some of the early comparisons were to Eliza,
right?
And Eliza, had an interesting approach. I mean, you pick out objects in a sentence, and verbs, the things that aren't objects, and you just reconstruct them, which is not trivial in and of itself.
Right. But it is very mechanical in that sense.
It is. And ChatGPT, what I noticed when I started, because I've worked with Eliza before, I played around with it. It's cool. But when I played around with ChatGPT, the first thing I told you, Frank, was that it has a style. Yes. That was the first thing I noticed. It has a communication style.
Right.
And more recently, I've seen articles where professors or teachers are catching students using ChatGPT, and that's going to probably be a response market. Is, can you identify the style of ChatGPT enough to say to a student, did you at least ask the question? Did you ask ChatGPT to do your homework?
Right. And is there going to be a thing where you have to declare, like for that book, like, the chapter I'm writing, like, do I declare that I'm using ChatGPT? Which I probably will, because it's about AI, right? So
right. I mean, I would, and it kind of, it's in that particular instance, it's a good thing. If you were writing a romance novel, you would lose at least one of those, one aspect of it being
right. Well, yeah, there's a certain, but I do wonder, like, what is you mentioned romance novels. What if you fed ChatGPT every romance novel ever written?
Yeah.
Like, it would produce something in a style. Like, and here's another thing, right? Like, what if you've written a lot of books, you've written like 12 or 20. I don't know. I forget what the number is.
I think it's 14.
Double digits.
Yes.
What if we took all your books, fed it into a chat GPT, all your blog posts?
It'd probably break it.
Probably. Well, there was,
there's Frank's World, 25 years. Well, not minus, really.
Only since 2017. Thanks, ClearDB, for clearing me out. But that was an important lesson, but that's another sidetrack.
But I mean, could you, and how would that, if you're able to do that, how does that fit into another topic we've talked about on the podcast with virtual people who have passed away? Right? How does this feed into that?
See, and it's been interesting because there's been so many family members that have died. For me, like there's a number yesterday, right? I was at Sky Zone with the kids and, managed to get the two of them together smiling, which apparently that's more difficult than I would have anticipated.
Well, they're boys. You have to.
And they're boys. Right. Right. Yes. And I took a picture and I was like, I got to send this to my mom. Oh, I can't.
Yeah.
Now I know, like, even if I did have, say, a virtual representation of her.
Yeah.
That would probably hit a few dopamine centers in my brain, but it just would not. I don't know. For me, that's just a bridge too far for my thing. Like, I know I could send it to her, but in a sense, we do this, right? So here's another kind of angle of it, right? Like, I know my mom would be proud if I sent her that picture, right? So in my mind, I have a virtual model of my mom.
Right.
That sounds really weird. But like in my mind, but when someone passes on, you're like, oh, I bet, so-and-so would love to see this, like, or so-and-so would be proud. That is a virtual model that kind of does exist inside of our imaginations. Is this really so different? I don't know. Like,
I mean, I can definitely see differences.
Yeah.
But it is, like you said earlier, a bridge too far. It gets over into uncanny.
It is in the uncanny
if it's there. And is it, I think the question is there value there?
And I think for some people there is.
I think, and I agree. I agree with that. For some, and I think there is.
I think for some people it is. I think for some people that is very therapeutic.
Mm-hmm.
I do see the potential for abuse of that.
Yep.
Because what if, let's just say, we'll pick on Jeff Bezos, right? He's got enough money. He'll wipe his tears with $100 bills. Right. Well, what if Alexa had that skill, right? What if it said, my mom would call me Frankie. She's listening. I don't know if you heard it, but I activated.
I didn't hear it.
But it'd be like, she'd say, I'd be like, oh, check out this, what would you do, Mom, in this situation? And, what if she said, well, Frankie, I would do this. Oh, and by the way, toothpaste is on sale. Would you like to order it? Like, that's more than one bridge too far. I mean, that's, but like, what would stop somebody from doing that aside from the boundaries of good taste? And even then,
well, you and I have seen, we've lived through enough of sci-fi movies as they've evolved to see them tracking and then, kind of extending the idea of this whole advertising driven future. Think about the
Minority Report.
The Minority Report was one. For some reason, do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? That movie. What was that? They remade it recently.
Arnold Schwarzenegger one.
There was that one. Yeah, that's a different one. But this was the one about the androids that were trying to stay
carbon.
That was one too, but this was different. I can't remember it. I can't believe I'm saying. So
it's the last Friday of the year.
I'm zoning.
Some slack.
I'm gonna feel so silly when I listen to this again. I'm gonna scream at the screen.
You'll be like, ah!
Yes.
But
Harrison Ford played in the original.
Oh, Blade Runner.
Blade Runner. Thank you. Yes. That was based on, I believe, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, but I still remember the books because I read the books.
Well, what's interesting about Philip K. Dick books is that the same story has inspired different movies.
Yes.
Like, I think Johnny Paycheck, is it Paycheck? Not Johnny
Paycheck.
Paycheck was.
It was just called Paycheck, I think.
There was one story that spawned Total Recall and I think Paycheck. I think. Or.
Well, I'll tell you this: Total Recall. Yeah, you're right. The Total Recall story, though, was actually made differently. It was interpreted differently, and
that's right. That's what it was. And then there was another
they made
one,
the remade one, which was closer to the original story.
Oh, really? Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. I like the original of that one though, because
I did too. I mean, both of them were good, but yeah. And I see that a lot. I'll read a book and I'll enjoy it, and they'll make a movie out of it, and I'll watch the movie and go, I enjoy that too, even though they're different. And I see the benefit of staying close to some writing, and then I see the benefit of kind of changing some things. Although I will say, as much as I loved both the Expanse books and the Expanse series, I was disappointed with a couple of the changes that they made. I don't want to spoil it for anybody.
I thought that was extremely faithful, but yeah,
Alex's character is the one
that is
I was like, what?
That was
where are you going?
Yeah. That was kind of, I think, related to what the actor had done off screen as opposed to.
I wasn't aware of that.
He was killed off because. Well, yeah, I already spoiled it, but
we can talk about it.
The actor had gotten himself into some trouble, shall we say?
Gotcha. Okay, well now that makes sense.
But what speaking of picking on Jeff Bezos,
yes,
I saw Lord of the Rings. Or the Rings of Power.
Yes,
I couldn't get past 5 minutes of it because it was just disappointing. And the whole time I'm watching it, I think this might also be a cautionary tale. Where's the $1 billion moment? Like, where's the $1 billion moment? And for me, I maybe I was salty because I'm like, they cut the Expanse off at season 6, and there's at least 4 more seasons of material, at least.
Yeah. I didn't watch it. I heard people complain about it enough.
You spent $1 billion on this, but you couldn't give the Expanse the full treatment.
Yeah,
that was really and I'm like, when I saw there's a scene where it looks like from a cut scene from a video game from 2005.
Oh wow!
And I'm like, granted, it's only maybe a second, but that just really kind of ruined it for me. Like, you know what? I'll watch something else. Because I was already going in salty. I'm like, they spent $1 billion on this.
Yeah.
And whenever you start a movie or a story where there's narration and they're kind of giving you the backstory, there's a school of thought, and I've studied. I'm not Stanley Kubrick, right? But I did spend a time where I had a midlife crisis, and I'm like, I want to be a filmmaker, right? I did study storytelling and things like that, and storytelling techniques and things like that. Film Right is the best YouTube channel for that sort of thing. And I'm far from, dude, I drive a Honda, right? So clearly I'm not like Michael Bay or whatever, but if you have to start off, particularly in a movie, you have 2 hours to tell a story, give or take some time. But if you're doing a mini series where you have effectively somewhere between 10 to 20 hours, if you start off the story with a voiceover narration and they're going over the history of how you got to this point, that was my first really? And it was a good 2-minute intro of well, this happened. And I'm not a big Tolkien fan, so I'll put that out there, right? So I'm not, I know roughly what an orc is, and I know what this is, and that, but I don't know it well enough to do that. But I'm hearing names, and they're saying, and then I know I'm totally going to get hate mail for this, right? So this is what I remember, right? So, then blah, 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 blah land. And he took all the trolls, and then they got swords, and then they made the brotherhood of this. And who the blank are these people? Why should I pick? Right. And there's this whole school of thought, what's it? You show, don't tell. And given that cinema or whatever you want to call streaming is a visual medium, it seemed like, again, the whole time I'm thinking, dude, you had $1 billion. You couldn't find the best writers on the freaking planet. You couldn't use ChatGPT.
Well, I don't think it was out. I'll say that in their defense, and in their defense too. I'll say it may have made sense later if you just stuck.
It might have made sense later. Yeah. Well, but I mean, I don't know. Maybe.
And people I respect who I would say share a level of Tolkien fandom that I do,
Mhm.
said to me, two actually said, if you watch it and try not to get distracted by stuff that bothers you, whatever that may be. And they had each of them had opposing lists. It was very interesting listening to these opinions. They said if you stay like on the core on what Tolkien wrote, that it was a good series. And I found that interesting because these people are diametrically opposed politically,
Interesting.
and they like Tolkien. They enjoy Tolkien's writing.
So I don't have enough Tolkien kind of skin in the game that make it worth it. I was just watching for kind of like what does $1 billion production look like? Like, what are the VFX?
And I heard that a lot, and especially, I follow Expanse stuff, which is it appears over for now. I don't know if the writers are going to do any more with that or not.
I hope that, and I don't want to give too much away from the books, is that in the story there is a significant time gap.
Yes,
I hope
they could fill that with another number of books, I would say.
Well, all the short stories, each one of those short stories is a good story on itself. Like,
True.
If you've seen season 6, the two threads in the story, Strange Dogs, is part of it. And it's just kind of like, and if you haven't read the books, people watching, they're like, who is this kid?
Right.
Why do we care? Like, what does this matter? Well, it turns out it matters quite a bit. Particularly,
you just don't see the rest of that story.
Well, you don't see
and that actually is a launch of a whole big part of the second half that hasn't been made into a show.
Yeah.
I would love to see what they would do with the end of the official series. I haven't read
which end,
and I'll
which
admit
which end.
Well, so I need to qualify that. I didn't read the collection of short stories, which had one more.
Oh, I didn't read that
new one. I have not read that.
So there's the epilogue in one of the actual books.
Yes,
which was
and I think it was book. What was the last official book before the last anthology? I think it was 9. Yeah. That epilogue that's the one I want to see. That would be cool mind.
Just to see that was the one that was like a punch to the gut, because you're like, you're reading and you're like, because it's such an epic series, and I haven't read all the books, right? I've kind of done the island hopping of the books, and
okay.
But I'm reading like the last section, and I'm like, well, it's kind of sad to see this end, and then they cut to kind of the epilogue, and you're like, I didn't see that coming.
Me either.
I mean, like in retrospect, I'm like, then that's good writing, right? In retrospect, you see the foreshadowing, you see all that. That's good writing.
Yes,
which is very
once
rare.
You think about it, once you've read the entire thing,
right?
Because you go back and it's
why can't that happen? Yeah. Like, why can't that happen? Like, that I don't want to say anymore.
Great writing. I don't think. Anyway, we've gone down the path, and we're almost at an hour and 10 minutes.
I know. I want to cut it short, but I want to give a big shout out to Rupesh.
Yeah, hey Rupesh.
And he is correct that storage is the big problem for renewables.
It can be. I have a joke that I can't share about storage because it's not nice.
But ironically, I've been talking this whole time, right? And it was about my year in review. But this whole idea of doing a podcast episode about a year in review was inspired by a blog post on your blog, andyleonard.blog.
I just recorded a couple of highlights. I think last year I did something with stats about blog post hits and stuff like that, and I just wasn't into it. I just wanted to kind of roll through and talk about kind of life in general, business in general stuff. And it was a recovering year, I'll say, business wise. And it's just, it's interesting. Frank, I will be, Lord willing, if I make it to July 24th, I will be 60 years old in 2023. Wow. And I don't feel 60 years old. I feel like, I don't know, I feel half that age. Physically now, there's some cracks in that vision, vision being one of the cracks, but yeah, it's a kind of interesting to look back at the review and kind of see some patterns repeating themselves. I've been in tech since I was 12, really 11, the end of my 11, right before I turned 12. That's that's 49 years. You know, coming up in May, it will be 49 years. Wow. That's a long time. And I wasn't like making a living doing it. It was a hobby until the 90s. And then I kind of switched into doing that. So looking at the years and the jumps in this, I definitely see things like Chat GPT has that feel about it. And yeah, it's an emotional thing for me. But about once a decade, I see something bust out. And so far, I've had the same feeling about it, that's going to be cool. If somebody asks me to articulate it, that's the best I can do. That's going to be cool. And I'm not a visionary. If I was, I could make $1 bajillion off of it, but I can see somebody's going to take that and run with it. And AI, machine learning, all of the things we talked about earlier. I like, Kevin, I like that term, explainable AI. Frank, I like, AI for augmentation or augmenting. Those are great terms. And there's already videos out on YouTube about businesses you could start and some businesses that have already started.
They're already started, like Lensa. I always like when I saw Lensa, I was like, how are they doing it? Did they do their own thing? Nope. They actually had some wrapper around it. And I was like,
they're running, what is the thing?
They're running Dolly, I think, or Stable Diffusion.
No, it is Stable Diffusion. Yeah, they're running.
I got to turn my camera off for a second.
Okay, go ahead.
All right,
but they're doing Stable Diffusion and just using one of the algorithms. I think like Magic or something like that.
Midjourney, maybe. Okay. I don't know. There's like a dozen of them, but like they basically created an app that's a wrapper around all of this stuff, and they charge you $10
a pop.
Yeah. Like, I was almost going to sign up, but what stopped me was, oddly enough, the privacy aspect. Like, what are they doing with the pictures of me? Like, so I was like, I'm going to hold off on that, right? But now I know that they're using Midjourney or Stable. I'll have to watch the video again. I'll just do it myself. Because
it inspired me. You've been sending me AI art for a year and a half
now, right? Yeah.
Yeah, at least. And I've been like, I don't have a powerful enough machine. I know you complained about that until you built another machine just for that, and the rendering speed went crazy high. I started looking at a video about how to set up Stable Diffusion locally, and this 5-year-old ThinkPad at least meets the minimum requirements. Now imagine I'll push the go button and it's going to run for weeks or something, but I can't believe that.
But not even that though. Like you can use the cloud. I mean, Google Colab.
You can, if you're not worried about the privacy.
Right. Well, yeah, you got me there.
But
which is a good segue. Which is a good segue.
It is good segue.
The product that I have, Red Hat OpenShift Data Science. Actually, it's based on OpenShift, right? So it's all data science tools, right? And this is an incidental commercial. Like we didn't plan on it. No. But we actually have an on-prem version now, right? So you can run it today in the AWS Marketplace. Nice. You can run it very soon in Azure. But as of January 3rd, you'll be able to purchase an on-prem version.
Nice.
Which is interesting because SageMaker, Azure ML, they're all based on Jupyter notebooks, right? They're all some flavor of that open source tech. And Red Hat OpenShift Data Science, or RODS, is a product that can run anywhere OpenShift runs. So AWS, Azure, GCP, or on-prem or at the edge. So to your point, privacy is a big hot button issue for a lot of customers. A lot of customers I would get inquiries at least once a week from customers, like, hey, can we train the model like on-prem, or can we train the model in the cloud, but leave the data on-prem? I was like, that doesn't exist yet. Now there are some research things where they can kind of anonymize data.
Yeah.
But that what you're asking to do is a paradox, right? Like I need to train on this data, but you can't see the data. That I won't say that problem will never be solved, but it's not going to happen soon.
Well, you've heard me talk about a client that I did work for a few years ago that had a very similar request, and it was it was along that same lines, anonymizing data. I understood the use case. I got it. And I had to gently explain why it wasn't possible.
Right.
And this was just straight up BI. This wasn't any AI type thing at all. It was just regular analytics, which, statistical. It's kind of the underlying pieces and parts of machine learning and all of that stuff. But we were doing something very basic. And if you do not have enough information to discriminate source data points, then you can't do the work. And there's some generic stuff you can do over that, but you can't correlate that back to real life. And it becomes an issue when you don't have enough data to count the data points. That's an important number. The count.
Well, exactly. No, it's an interesting thing, and I think you're going to see more of that in 2023 in terms of the demand for explainable AI, like Kevin said. And
no, it's a great term. We're going to have to give you credit for that, Kevin. That's a great term.
But I mean that's going to be crucial in a lot of fields in terms of ethics and anti-bias and things like that. And I also think that the augmentation aspect of it, right? So if you look at kind of and there was another YouTuber that was talking about this. I think she was an artist and like an actual honest to God artist, like paintbrushes and all.
Right.
And her comparison was when Photoshop first came out, or Illustrator, all the digital tools.
Yeah.
There was a lot of in the art world, not that art world, not big capital A, capital W art world. There was a lot of pushback from kind of the art world, lowercase, about, is that art? Is that this? Eventually,
that's a fair question.
Eventually, it became accepted, and her point of view was that this is the same here, in the idea that you can, if I type in, dachshund, dachshunds in the style of, dachshund portrait in the style of Vincent van Gogh, clearly I can't claim that's the Van Gogh original, right? Because clearly, or I'll pick a modern example, right? Like, a Ferrari in the style of Vincent van Gogh on a Starry Night. Clearly that is not an original. But also too, there's the thought of, if the model has been trained on Van Gogh's work,
right?
Should Van Gogh's estate or family or whoever owns the rights to it, if anyone owns the rights to it, should they get a cut? Should they get a cut? And that's actually, I think, a court case now, is that there's some pop artist, I forget who it was, but who somebody's producing artwork that it looks a lot like her style. I forget her name.
Yeah.
And she's like, that's not fair. And I get it. I totally understand her point. However, the same thing, if I were a human and if I were a human, that's funny. That's my Mark Zuckerberg moment there.
Now you've told everybody you're actually from another planet.
Right. Mark Zuckerberg said, if I were a human, oh wait, I am. Oh, anyway, I just need a Hawaiian island, just like he has. I'm good. I won't ask for much. Just a Hawaiian island all myself. I totally lost my train of thought.
Oh, I'm sorry, Frank.
No, that's okay. But if say Keith Haring is an artist I remember, big in New York City in the 90s, in the late 80s, like very popular guy. If I draw something in his style, right, what does that make me? Right? Do I owe his estate? Do I owe his family or whoever owns his rights? Do I owe them a cut? Now, I suppose if I go and I publish artwork and print up T-shirts with stuff like that, you could make the case that maybe he needs a royalty. But can you trademark a style? I don't know. Like, I'm not.
It's an interesting thought. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that either, and I think there's more to come on this from us and others. I look forward to it, to more clarification, more tech.
Here's my prediction for the future.
What's your prediction, Frank?
Lawyers are going to make a lot of money.
That sounds fair. Yeah.
Always bet on the lawyers.
See. That's true. Well, Frank, this has been a great end of the year
show. This has been awesome.
2022 is a good season for.
It's been a good year for us.
Data driven and
the amount we put out, the traffic we got out, the streaming that we're doing, and I look forward to doing more in 2023. I will say the one disappointment is that the data channel is not, and this is, I would say 90% on me.
It's not. It's.
But I think I want to reevaluate offline what our strategy is going to be for the data channel and kind of other related properties.
Yeah, I think we're kind of learning as we go with that, but that's okay. We'll figure.
Well, you know, even Disney's having trouble with streaming, so they got. Well, I was going to say they got a lot of money. They used to have a lot of money. Thanks, Kevin, for tuning in. Thanks for Pesh. Thanks for our anonymous LinkedIn user. I pronounced it right this time. And Happy New Year to you. Happy New Year to everyone. And we'll see you next year. And I'm going to roll the outro graphics. Any parting thoughts?
No, sir. Thanks.
All right. I will say one last thing. Go to thedatadrivenbook.com.
Oh, definitely.
Start off a reading habit in the new year. I will tell you this. No exaggeration. When I went from reading like maybe 10, 15 books a year, which the average American reads one or less per year, according to Grant Cardone. I don't know where you got his statistics.
Wow.
But when I read, I thought I was macking, like I was the Mac Daddy when I was doing 10 to 15 a year. But I noticed when I made the commitment based on a challenge from Grant Cardone, to go to 150 books a year, there's a quantum shift, right? There's like this exponential boost, because you'll hear something in one book if you're listening to it, and then you'll see something on the news or read an article and you're like, you know what? I see a connection here.
Yep.
And I think just like GPT, just like GPT-3, the more input data you have, the better the quality output model.
So true.
Go to thedatadrivenbook.com or listen.
Yes.
And with that, I will end the stream because this has been particularly long. Thanks for tuning in. And I'll let the nice British lady end the show. So I put a little plug in there for Bailey.
Cool.
All right. Andy, if I don't talk to you, but I know I will talk to you, have a good New Year's.
You too, brother.
Thanks for listening, and we look forward to more goodness in the new year. You know what would be good? You rating and reviewing our podcast wherever you listen to us. Thanks and Happy New Year.